What happens when a beloved British acting legend walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a friendly chat, only to be met with condescending questions, personal attacks, and a host who seems more interested in causing controversy than having a conversation? In just 41 seconds of one particular exchange, the entire interview would spiral out of control, leading to one of the most shocking exits in daytime television history. David Jason, known and loved by millions for his roles in classic British television, sat down on the Loose Women panel expecting what he thought would be a light-hearted discussion about his career. The studio audience was packed, eager to hear stories from the man who had brought so much joy to their living rooms over the years. But what started as a seemingly normal interview quickly turned into something nobody in that studio could have predicted. Denise Welch sat in the center of the panel, flanked by Nadia Sawalha, Kay Adams, and Linda Robson. The energy in the studio felt off from the very beginning. David walked out to warm applause, smiling and waving to the audience. He took his seat, adjusted his jacket, and prepared for what he assumed would be a pleasant conversation. "David, welcome to the show," Denise said, her tone already carrying an edge that made the other panelists glance at each other. "So lovely of you to grace us with your presence." David smiled, seemingly missing the sarcasm. "Thank you for having me. It is always nice to be here today." "Is it, though?" Denise shot back immediately. "Because from what I have heard, you do not really do much press anymore. Too important for shows like ours?" The audience went quiet. Linda Robson shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and Nadia raised her eyebrows. David laughed nervously, clearly caught off guard. No, that is not it at all," he replied, keeping his composure. "I have just been quite busy with work. That is all. I am delighted to be here today." "Busy with work," Denise repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Right. So, tell me, David, do you think your old shows still hold up? Or are they a bit outdated now? You know, some people say they are not really relevant anymore." Kay Adams jumped in, trying to soften the blow. "I think what Denise means is that television has changed so much, but your work is still loved by so many people, David. Only Fools and Horses is still watched by millions." "Thank you, Kay," David said, grateful for the intervention. "I think good storytelling is timeless. People connect with characters and stories that feel real, that feel human. That does not go out of style." "How lovely," Denise said, her words coated in condescension. "How absolutely lovely that you think that. But let me ask you something, David. Do you ever think that maybe you have had your time? That maybe it is time to let younger, more diverse voices have the spotlight?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze. Nadia Sawalha put her hand to her mouth, shocked at what she had just heard. Linda Robson looked directly at Denise with an expression of disbelief. David took a deep breath, his smile fading slightly. "I am not sure I understand what you are asking me, Denise. Could you please clarify?" "Oh, I think you do," Denise continued, leaning forward. "I am asking if you, a wealthy, privileged man who has had decades of success, ever thinks about stepping aside, about making room for people who have not had the same advantages you have had." "Denise, that is not fair," Linda interjected, her voice firm. "David has earned his success through talent and hard work." "Has he, though?" Denise snapped, turning to face Linda with visible anger. "Or has he benefited from a system that has always favored people like him?" David raised his hand calmly. "I appreciate the passion, but I think we should keep this civil. I have never tried to block anyone from opportunities. I have always supported new talent. In fact, I have mentored many young actors over the years." "How noble of you," Denise said mockingly. "The great David Jason, mentoring the less fortunate. Do you want a medal for that?" Nadia finally spoke up, her voice sharp. "Denise, what are you doing? This is completely out of line." "I am doing my job, Nadia," Denise replied coldly. "I am asking the questions that people want answered. Or do you think we should just sit here and fawn over him like everyone else does?" The audience began to murmur. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others were visibly angry at how David was being treated. Kay Adams tried again to redirect the conversation. David, let us talk about your new project. I heard you have been working on something exciting. But Denise was not finished. Before we move on, I want David to answer my question. Do you think you have had unfair advantages in your career? Yes or no? David looked at her, his expression hardening. I think I have worked incredibly hard for everything I have achieved. I came from a working class background. I started from nothing. I have spent decades perfecting my craft, taking risks and facing rejection. So no, I do not think my success has been unfair. Typical, Denise scoffed. The wealthy always think they have earned everything on their own. They never want to acknowledge the privilege they have had. Privilege? David repeated, his voice rising slightly for the first time. What privilege? I left school at 14. I worked in a garage. I did odd jobs for years before I ever got an acting role. I auditioned hundreds of times and got rejected more times than I can count. Well, where was my privilege then? You are a white man, David, Denise said bluntly. That is privilege whether you want to admit it or not. The audience gasped. Linda Robson stood up from her chair. Denise, that is enough. This is completely inappropriate. Sit down, Linda, Denise commanded. I am having a conversation here. This is not a conversation, David said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. This is an attack. I came here to talk about my work, to connect with people who enjoy what I do. I did not come here to be lectured about things that have nothing to do with why I was invited. Maybe that is the problem, David, Denise continued, refusing to back down. Maybe you think everything should be easy for you, that you should just be celebrated without ever being challenged. Nadia shook her head in disgust. This is not challenging, Denise. This is being cruel. There is a difference. Oh, please, Denise dismissed her with a wave. David can handle it. He is a big boy. Are you not, David? Or do you need these women to protect you? David stood up from his seat. The audience went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop in that studio. His face was calm, but his eyes showed the hurt and frustration he was feeling. I have been in this industry for over 50 years, he said quietly. I have been interviewed thousands of times. I have been asked tough questions, challenging questions, uncomfortable questions. But I have never, in all my years, been treated with such disrespect. Not for anything I have done, but simply for existing. Oh, here we go, Denise muttered. The victim act. Denise, stop it, Kay Adams said firmly. Just stop, but David continued, his voice growing stronger. You have made assumptions about me, about my life, about my character, without knowing anything about me. You have decided that because of how I look or what you perceive my background to be, that I am somehow the enemy, that I do not deserve the success I have worked for. I never said that, Denise protested weakly. You absolutely did, David replied. Every word out of your mouth since I sat down has been designed to diminish me, to make me feel small, to suggest that I have done something wrong simply by being successful, and I will not stand for it. The other panelists sat in stunned silence. The audience was completely still, hanging on every word. You know what the saddest part is? David continued. I have always admired this show. I have watched it with my family. I have seen the important conversations you have had, the way you have given voice to issues that matter. But today, you have turned it into something ugly. You have used it as a platform not to discuss ideas, but to tear someone down for no reason other than your own agenda. Denise crossed her arms defensively. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I stand by everything I said. Someone needs to ask these questions. No, David said firmly. Someone needs to ask thoughtful questions. Someone needs to create dialogue, not conflict. What you have done here today is not brave. It is not important. It is just mean. Linda Robson started clapping. Slowly at first, then joined by Nadia, then Kay. And then, like a wave, the entire audience erupted into applause. They were applauding David, not for his acting, but for his dignity in the face of such treatment. Denise sat there, her face reddening, clearly not expecting this response. "Well," she said, trying to regain control, "I think we need to take a commercial break." "No," David said, cutting her off. "I think I need to leave." "You cannot just leave in the middle of the show," Denise said, her voice rising in pitch. "Watch me," David replied calmly. He turned to the other panelists. "Linda, Nadia, Kay, it was lovely to see you all. Thank you for trying to make this bearable." Then he looked directly at Denise. "And as for you, I hope you take some time to reflect on why you felt the need to treat a guest this way. Because whatever point you were trying to make, all you have done is show your own insecurity and bitterness." The audience erupted again, and this time with cheers and shouts of support. Denise tried to speak, but her words were drowned out by the noise. "David, please," Kay said, reaching out to him. "You do not have to go." "I appreciate that, Kay," David said gently. "But I do. I have spent my entire career treating people with respect, and I expect the same in return. Clearly, I am not going to get that here today." He began to walk off the set. A producer rushed onto the stage, trying to stop him, but David politely, but firmly, moved past him. The cameras followed him as he walked through the studio, the audience still on their feet, still applauding. Denise finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. We are trying to have an important conversation here, and he is running away." "No, Denise," Nadia said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You were not trying to have a conversation. You were trying to humiliate him, and it backfired spectacularly." "I cannot believe what I just witnessed," Linda added. "That was disgraceful, Denise. Absolutely disgraceful." Denise looked at the camera, trying to compose herself. "We will be right back after this break." But the damage was done. David Jason was gone. The studio was in chaos. The audience was still buzzing with energy, some people booing, others still applauding the empty space where David had been sitting moments before. Backstage, David was met by several crew members who apologized profusely for what had happened. He thanked them graciously, shook hands with those who approached him, and made his way to the exit. Back on set, Denise was in a heated discussion with the producers. Linda, Nadia, and Kay sat at the panel, visibly upset by what had just transpired. "I cannot believe she did that," Nadia said, her voice shaking slightly. "I am actually embarrassed to be sitting here right now." "We should have done more to stop it," Kay said. "We should have shut it down earlier." "We tried," Linda replied. But Denise was determined. I have never seen her like that. It was like she had decided before he even walked out here that she was going to go after him. The commercial break ended, and the show returned to air. Denise was back in her seat, her expression tight and controlled. The other panelists looked uncomfortable. "Welcome back," Denise said, her voice strained. "As you can see, David Jason has chosen to leave the show. We had hoped to have a frank discussion about some important issues, but unfortunately, he was not willing to engage." "That's not what happened, Denise," Nadia interrupted immediately. "Let us be honest with the viewers. You attacked him from the moment he sat down. You were rude, you were condescending, and you were completely out of line." The audience applauded again. Denise glared at Nadia. "I was asking legitimate questions," Denise insisted. "No," Linda said firmly. "You were not. You were picking a fight. And you picked the wrong person to fight with, because David Jason is one of the most respected, most beloved people in this industry. And all you did was prove that he deserves that respect." Kay nodded in agreement. "I think we owe David an apology. On behalf of the show, on behalf of all of us. What happened here today should not have happened." Denise sat in silence, her jaw clenched. The tension on the set was palpable. The producers were frantically talking in the control room, trying to figure out how to salvage what was left of the show. "I am not apologizing," Denise finally said. "I asked the questions that needed to be asked. If David could not handle that, that is on him." The audience erupted in boos. Actual, loud boos filled the studio. Denise looked shocked. She was used to being controversial, used to stirring the pot, but she had never experienced this level of backlash from a live audience. "Denise, listen to them," Kay pleaded. "Listen to what they are telling you. They are telling you that you went too far." "They do not understand," Denise snapped back. "They do not understand what I was trying to do." "What were you trying to do?" Nadia demanded. "Because from where I was sitting, and it looked like you were trying to bully a lovely man who has never done anything to you." "Bully?" Denise scoffed. "I was holding him accountable." "Accountable for what?" Linda asked, her voice rising. "For being successful? For working hard? For being talented? What exactly did he need to be held accountable for, Denise?" Denise opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She looked around the set, seeing the disgust on the faces of her fellow panelists, hearing the continued disapproval from the audience. For the first time, she seemed to realize that she had miscalculated badly. "I was just," she started, then stopped. "I thought we could have a real conversation about privilege and opportunity." "But you did not want a conversation," Nadia said quietly. "You wanted a confrontation. You decided before he even sat down that you were going to attack him. We all saw it, Denise. The way you looked at him when he walked out. The tone you used from your very first question. This was planned." "It was not planned," Denise protested weakly. "Then what was it?" Kay asked. "Because it certainly was not professional. It was not kind. It was not fair. It was just cruel. Ladies and gentlemen, please," Kay said, trying to calm the crowd, "let us try to get through the rest of the show." But it was clear that nobody cared about the rest of the show. The only thing anyone wanted to talk about, the only thing anyone could think about, was what had just happened with David Jason. One audience member stood up and shouted, "You should be ashamed of yourself, Denise." Another voice joined in. "David Jason is a national treasure. How dare you treat him like that?" The calls of support for David and criticism of Denise continued. Security did not intervene because the audience was not being threatening, just passionate. They were expressing their genuine outrage at what they had witnessed. Denise tried to speak over the noise. "Please, everyone, if we could just settle down." But her words carried no authority now. She had lost the room completely. The audience had turned against her, and there was no getting them back. Throughout the remaining segments, the other panelists tried to steer the conversation toward other topics, but the energy was gone. The audience was restless. Social media, though not mentioned specifically, was clearly exploding based on the producers' reactions backstage. Linda looked at the camera during one segment and spoke directly to the viewers. "I just want to say, on a personal level, that I am so sorry for what happened today. David Jason is a gentleman. He did not deserve that treatment. And I hope he knows that not everyone on this panel shares the views that were expressed today." Denise rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, Linda. You are being dramatic." "No, Denise," Linda shot back. "You are being cruel. There is a difference between asking tough questions and being nasty. And what you did today was nasty. You owe David an apology. You owe this audience an apology. You owe all of us an apology." "I owe no one anything," Denise retorted. The show limped to its conclusion. The final moments were awkward and tense. Denise tried to do her usual sign-off, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Thank you for watching Loose Women. We will see you tomorrow," she said quietly. But even those simple words felt hollow. The audience remained silent, offering no applause, no warmth, just cold, uncomfortable silence that spoke volumes about how they felt. The credits rolled, and the second the cameras were off, chaos erupted on the set. Linda and Nadia immediately confronted Denise, their voices raised. Kay stood to the side, shaking her head in disbelief. The studio audience filed out, many of them discussing what they had just witnessed. In the green room, David Jason gathered his belongings. A production assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Jason, I just wanted to say, on behalf of many of us here, we are so sorry. That should never have happened." David smiled kindly. "Thank you. I appreciate that. Mate, you all did nothing wrong. Sometimes these things happen. I just wish it had been handled differently." "Is there anything we can do?" the assistant asked. No, David replied. "I'm fine. Truly. I have been in this business long enough to know that not every interview goes smoothly. I just did not expect it to go quite like that." He finished packing his things and headed toward the exit. As he walked through the corridor, crew members stopped him, each one apologizing, each one expressing their support. David thanked each person graciously, never showing anger or bitterness, only class and dignity. Back on the set, the argument between the panelists continued. Producers tried to mediate, but the damage to the relationships was clear. Nadia was adamant. "I am not coming back if she is here," she said, pointing at Denise. "I cannot be part of a show that treats guests like that. It goes against everything I believe in." Linda nodded in agreement. "I feel the same way. What happened today was unacceptable." Denise stood her ground. "Fine, leave then. I do not need any of you. I am the one who makes this show interesting. I am the one who is not afraid to ask the real questions." "The real questions?" Kay repeated incredulously. "Denise, you were not asking questions. You were attacking someone. There is a massive difference, and if you cannot see that, then I do not know what to say to you." The meeting broke up without resolution. The producers knew they had a crisis on their hands. The panelists went their separate ways, each processing what had happened in their own way. David Jason left the building and got into his car. He sat there for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had handled himself with incredible grace under pressure, never losing his temper, never stooping to Denise's level. He had simply stated his truth and walked away when it became clear that the situation was not going to improve. As he drove away from the studio, he thought about the interview. He thought about the other panelists who had tried to defend him. He thought about the audience who had stood up for him. And he thought about Denise, wondering what had driven her to such hostility. But mostly, he felt at peace with his decision to leave. He had stood up for himself without being aggressive. He had maintained his dignity without being passive. He had shown that it is possible to be strong and kind at the same time. The 41 seconds that had started the downward spiral kept replaying in his mind. The moment when Denise had questioned whether his work was still relevant. That single comment had set the tone for everything that followed. It had revealed her true intentions, her desire not to have a conversation, but to create conflict. David had spent his entire career bringing joy to people. He had made them laugh, made them think, made them feel. And he was not going to let one bitter person take that away from him or make him question his worth. He thought about all the young actors he had mentored over the years, all the advice he had given about handling difficult situations in the industry, and he realized that today he had practiced what he preached. He had shown that you do not have to engage with negativity. You do not have to defend yourself against baseless attacks. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply walk away. The interview had started with such promise. David had been excited to share stories, to connect with the audience, to talk about his passion for acting. But instead, it had turned into something ugly, something he wanted no part of. As he drove through the streets, he thought about the fans who loved his work, the families who watched his shows together, the people who had written to him over the years, telling him how much his performances had meant to them. Those were the people he cared about. Those were the people whose opinions mattered. Denise's words, her accusations, her attempts to diminish him, they all faded into insignificance when he thought about the positive impact he had had on so many lives. That was what mattered. That was what was real. But he had spent decades building a reputation based on talent, hard work, and treating people well. And one disastrous interview was not going to change that. If anything, the way he had handled himself today had only reinforced the respect people had for him. The other panelists had seen it. The audience had seen it. And anyone who watched the interview would see it too. Denise had tried to paint him as privileged and out of touch, but all she had done was reveal her own prejudices and insecurities. David smiled to himself. He had nothing to prove. He knew who he was. He knew what he had accomplished. And he knew that he had conducted himself with honor today, even in the face of such hostility. The drive home gave him time to reflect on the entire experience. The initial excitement of being invited on the show, the warm welcome from the audience, the sudden shift in tone when Denise began her interrogation, the support from Linda, Nadia, and Kay, the final decision to leave. Each moment had been a choice, and he had made the choices that aligned with his values. He had tried to be respectful, even when faced with disrespect. He had tried to answer questions honestly, even when they were asked in bad faith. And when it became clear that the situation was untenable, he had removed himself with grace. That was the mark of true character. Not how you behave when everything is going well, but how you respond when things go badly. And David had responded in a way that he could be proud of. He thought about the look on Denise's face when the audience had applauded him. The shock, the confusion, the realization that her plan had backfired. She had expected to embarrass him, to make him look bad. Instead, she had embarrassed herself. The other panelists had tried to warn her, tried to get her to change course. But she had been so committed to her narrative, so determined to make her point, that she could not see the damage she was doing, not just to David, but to herself and to the show. Linda, Nadia, and Kay had shown real courage in standing up to her. They could have stayed silent, let Denise continue her attack without resistance, but they had chosen to speak up, to defend someone who was being treated unfairly, and David was grateful for that. He wondered what would happen next. Would there be consequences for Denise? Would the show address what had happened? Would there be apologies? He did not know, and truthfully, he did not care that much. He had moved on the moment he walked off that set. What mattered to him was that he had stayed true to himself. He had not lashed out in anger. He had not insulted Denise, even though he could have. He had simply stated the facts, expressed his feelings, and left when it became clear that staying would serve no purpose. That was the lesson he hoped people would take from this. That you can be firm without being aggressive. That you can stand up for yourself without tearing others down. That dignity and strength are not mutually exclusive. As he pulled into his driveway, David felt a sense of relief. The ordeal was over. He had handled it the best way he knew how, and now he could put it behind him and focus on what really mattered. His work, his family, his friends, and the millions of people who appreciated what he brought to the world. He got out of the car and walked to his front door. Inside, he would be greeted by the warmth and comfort of home. Outside, the world would continue to talk about what had happened on Loose Women today. But David Jason would be at peace, knowing that he had conducted himself with the grace and dignity that had defined his entire career.